Hello everyone, thank you for joining me for another episode of Writing Rants. That's wRants. Today's episode was inspired by Caught Up in the Passion by Delta Rose. Caught Up in the Passion is a 34-page novella, or novelette depending on the literary circles in which you run. Only it feels more like an incomplete story than a short story. I'll go into more details about this later, but first I want to discuss what makes a good novella or shorter story. Let's use Of Mice and Men, arguably one of the most famous novellas, as an example. Without giving away too much of the story, this novella follows two men, George and his mentally disabled friend Lenny. They are migrant field hands on their way to another part of California for work. The story takes place over a 12-day period from the inciting incident to the resolution. And yet, in a mere 98 pages, you close the book feeling that you have read a well-developed story and have a good understanding of the characters. Though the story is short, nothing in the plot feels rushed, and every moment in the book feels deliberate and important. Now let's go back to Delta Rose's story. My first impression when I finished the book was that it felt incomplete. But when I sat and thought about the course of the story, it truly is a complete story with a resolved conflict, possibly two resolved conflicts. The story follows a self-made executive named Amanda. She is a hard-working, no-nonsense businesswoman. We learn that she is the begrudging maid of honor to her best friend, who knowingly pursued and snatched up the man that Amanda loved. The story takes us through the weekend rehearsal. Somewhat. More on this later. But at this retreat, Amanda meets her amour's hot younger brother, Josh, and sleeps with him. So, loosely speaking, the conflict of Amanda's loneliness and unrequited love is resolved by the sexual relationship she carries on with Josh, who is a younger, better version of Ryan, the man she loves. But it is this resolution that gives the work an unfinished feeling. Up until the Josh character is introduced, the reader hears about how much Amanda loves Ryan and wishes that she were his bride instead of her best friend, Sally. But then she sleeps with Josh and the story ends. Amanda suggests a continued sexual arrangement with Josh and adapts a cavalier attitude that contradicts all of the deep-rooted feelings she had for Ryan. Or at least, it contradicts the deep-rooted feelings we were supposed to believe she had for Ryan. Had Delta Rose downplayed Amanda's feelings for Ryan as a crush or infatuation, and not, I can't go on without you, love, her ability to so easily move on would feel more deliberate. Instead, the last chapter feels like Rose was on page 30 and said, damn, I wanted this to be under 35 pages, and I don't have an ending yet. I know, I'll add a few wrap-up pages that imply that Amanda and Josh will be an item. Another aspect at the end that leaves the story feeling unfinished is the lack of purpose in the fact that Amanda's best friend pursued Ryan, knowing that Amanda had feelings for him. This betrayal is noted numerous times before we get to the rehearsal, but nothing comes of it. No argument between Amanda and her friend, no discussion of Amanda's true feelings with Ryan. Not even an indication that Amanda slept with Josh to hurt Ryan or to help get over him, which would have been interesting. No, Amanda's drunk, Josh is hot, so they sleep together. And the sex is apparently so good that it humped all thoughts of Ryan from Amanda's head, and she decides to make Josh her new intern and permanent sex buddy. This leads me into the last point I'll make about the unfinished quality of the story. The introduction indicates Amanda's dread of the recital weekend because of her feelings. But as readers, we don't really get to experience the recital, or really any other plot points other than Amanda's interest in Ryan, and then the immediate displacement of those feelings from Ryan to Josh. Oh, and the sex scenes, of course. All of these elements made Caught Up in the Passion feel like an incomplete novel, rather than a completed novella. Now, I want to note that although my reaction to the story so far has been largely negative, Delta Rose did employ some things that are worth noting. First, our protagonist is a successful businesswoman who has everything she could want in life except love. Now, this is a trope we often see in male protagonists in romance novels, rarely in female. This gives Amanda the opportunity for an uncanny amount of agency. Although Delta Rose didn't quite make use of this opportunity, she wrote a character that could have been really interesting. Second, she introduces an interesting dynamic of friendship through Sally's almost vindictive interest in Ryan, only after discovering that Amanda liked him. This story could have been a great dialogue on betrayal by those close to you. Again, even though Delta Rose neglected this theme, we still give some points for what the story could have been. So if you are thinking about writing a novella, keep these few things in mind. Let the story carry you. If you wanted to write a shorter work, but the story is trying to carry you further, just go with it. 2. Make sure to tell a complete story. A novella is not the place to write and publish a small section of a story. You want your readers to have the satisfaction of feeling like they read an entire novel in an hour or two. 3. You want to make sure your resolution or ending is earned and not forced. And 4. Don't tread water on the page. If you are writing a novella, you have agreed to cram an entire novel into a fraction of a novel length. Everything that you mentioned should be significant. Every interaction between the characters should have a point. Every detail should act in service of the greater story or the greater theme. So with these tidbits, happy writing. I want to take this final moment to thank Delta Rose for allowing me to use her work in this episode. For the poets in the audience, don't forget that the Word Counts Poetry Contest is still in full effect until the end of July. This week's theme is Journeys, so be sure to check the Word Count Readers and Writers Facebook group to see the submissions of other poets and to submit a poem or two yourself. As always, thanks for tuning in. Until next week.